I'll call the meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded for the convenience of those unable to attend. Aday, would you please call roll?
Yes, John Madrick, Nicholas Sauter,
Present.
Sarita Scott, Benjamin Shanback, and Russell Buckley.
Present for the Chancellor.
Tom Shepard, Karina Tavares, Gregory Faulkner,
Present.
Marjorie Dienstag,
Present.
Alan Ong,
Present.
and Allison Hirsch.
Present.
Thank you, Aday. We have a quorum. The first order of business is agenda item number 2, noting the minutes of the Audit Committee of BERS held on October 6th, 2022. They have been provided by email and SharePoint. I have a motion to consider the minutes. Thank you, Nicholas. I have a second.
I'll second Greg.
All right, Greg, I'll get you on the second. Please raise your hand and voice vote aye with your name if you vote to approve the minutes. Aye, Russ.
Hi, Greg.
Aye, Nick.
Hi, Alan.
Hi, Marjorie.
Any abstentions or rejections? Hearing none, the motion carries. The next item on the agenda is number 3, election of a chair of the Audit Committee of BERS. May I have a motion to consider. Audible mention would be appreciated.
Aye, Nick.
Thank you, Nick. May I have a second?
Marjorie.
Second, Alan.
Thank you, Marjorie. Marjorie with the second. So the audit committee chair rotates annually. Generally speaking, should have knowledge of changing issues within the public sector, pension administration, enterprise risk management, internal controls, etc. Are there any questions about the role of audit chair? This does rotate annually. So since I've served as the chair for the last year, we need to elect a new chair to the position. John, I think, served 2 years ago. I served 3 years ago. John, maybe served. It's all a wash in my head. But I think John and I have handed it off in the past. So I would like to, unless there are any, I'll open it up for questions and discussion, if there is any, for the board. Hearing none, Nicholas, I would like to nominate you, the esteemed representative of Local 891, to serve as the Audit Committee Chair for calendar year 2023, if you choose to accept it.
I can't accept it at this time.
All right, well, someone else is going to have to volunteer, and this can take as long as the House of Speaker of the House election takes.
No, could we nominate John Madrick?
I believe he said the same thing.
Oh, he's declined also?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have Alan, Allison, Greg, and Marjorie in attendance. You are the 4 people who are eligible to fill this role for calendar year 2023.
Russ, I think it should be a principal member rather than an alternate.
Alan or Greg, you are the 2 people eligible to fill this role in calendar year 2023. Although I am an alternate and I've been doing it the last year.
But yeah, but really, you would be holding it together with the principal, right? So if the principal was present, they would be executing the duties of chair, And when the principal is absent and you are present, you execute the duties of chair.
I nominate Alan.
First mover
second.
advantage, yes, Greg?
Say it again.
First mover advantage.
That's right. I figured out. Let me jump to the gun. I nominate Alan. Or another suggestion would be, because the panel is, the number trust is going to expand. We're expanding the panel this month. There might be more options. If we could delay it to the next meeting.
I don't know that we're reconstituting the audit committee
Okay.
until 2024, because audit committee members, you all serve 2-year terms that began
Okay.
at the beginning of 2022 and roll through the end of 2023. What I will say is, well, actually, I have nothing to say.
That's accurate, Russ.
As I noted earlier, this can take as long as it needs to.
Well, I mean, is it possible to move are we obligated that we can't move forward unless we do the election, or is that?
Similar
we
to the House
postpone
of
it?
Representatives, the chair needs to rotate on an annual basis. I am not eligible to be the chair in 2023. Someone else needs to be the chair in 2023, and we cannot move on with the business of this meeting without electing a new chair.
Okay. Well, I mean, it seems we're at an impasse. Can the lawyer advise us? Is there any options that we have if we're not able to elect a chair at this meeting? Hello?
We would need to go into attorney-client.
I mean, we might as well do that as opposed to doing just, having silence. Why don't we just, what are our options? Because, based on the qualifications described, I definitely don't feel qualified to fill that role. Aside from, it's just a lot. So, I don't know if there are any other options for us, if we can delay, if we can wait. I don't know.
Is there a motion to move into attorney-client session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second, Marjorie.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye, Russell.
Nick,
Hi, Marjorie.
Any opposed or abstentions? Hearing none, we are now in attorney-client session. Karen, could you please remove all non-trustees or lawyers?
Okay, and I'll stop the recording as
Thank
well.
you. On.
Okay, recording's back on.
Excellent, thank you. We are still under consideration of agenda item number 3, election of a chair of the Audit Committee of BERS. Is there a nomination for the chair position?
I'll nominate myself.
Is
Ms.
there a
Gregg.
second to that nomination?
Second, Marjorie.
All right, are there any other nominations on the table? Hearing none, I'd like to vote on the nomination of Greg Faulkner as chair of the Audit Committee. All those in favor, please say aye now. Aye, Russell.
Hi,
Aye, Nick.
Marjorie.
Hi, Alan.
Hi, Greg.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, it is a unanimous election of Mr. Gregory Faulkner as chair of the Audit Committee.
And as Robert Redford said in a famous movie, what do I do now?
I just forwarded you the script, Greg, so
I
I
He's
understand
on
what
his
you're,
phone though.
you're on
Yeah.
your
on my
phone
phone,
though,
I
so
don't
that's
have
an
the
issue.
technology available to do all that. So,
Yeah.
Can
I
he
guess,
delegate to someone else to administer while he's?
can one of his staff do it? Is it okay if I had a day or somebody do that for me?
I don't see why not.
Yeah.
You
I
do
don't
it for
think
the exec
it's-
committee with Antonio.
Yeah, I don't
that'd
think
be
it's,
different.
I don't think it's a problem from a parliamentary perspective.
Okay. So if somebody could just, based on the fact that I don't have the technology, if somebody could just take care of that for me. And
I'll do it.
okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
So next is the agenda 4, the executive director's update. Sandy, would you like to share any remarks with us?
Yeah, this will be brief so we can get to the business. We have an entrance conference on the 10th with the controller regarding a January 4th announced audit, which will be quite broad reaching, controls, ops, investment, and governance. We have a January 25th New York City Audit Committee meeting that BERS will be appearing at. Remember that we have already filed our ACFR with a clean opinion from Grant Thornton, and that has already been delivered to the committee. Number 3, recommendation follow-ups. You'll get an update from a day on recommendation follow-ups. We're having this is a priority for us where a day and her team identifies opportunities for improvement. We are making sure that we are chasing those down. And then finally, we're entering the budget cycle. There will be a distribution from fiscal ops in the next week or so. We'll be kicking off the budget cycle. The board and we hope the audit committee sees an FTE request for the internal audit staff. To recall that when we stood up the internal audit program and Aday agreed to be the director of that program, we were rejected to hire FTEs, full-time equivalents, who were staff. We have been supporting Aday's efforts with outside contractor Baker Tilly. This has been a successful relationship with Baker Tilly. But there will be significant efficiencies from actually putting internal staff in a day's operation, and we hope to get that approval in this cycle. That's it for me. I'd be happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Thank you, Sandy. Any questions from the members? Hearing none, let's move on. The next item on the agenda is agenda item 5, the update from the Director of Internal Audit. Aday?
Yes, thank you, Alex. Just want to make sure everyone can see my screen. Yes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Happy New Year. Diving right in, although all members are not new to the BERS Audit Committee, we do have some relatively new members, and it is the start of a new year. So I wanted to quickly go over some key points relating to audit committees in general, as well as BERS Audit Committee in particular. So the BERS Audit Committee currently consists of 5 members and 5 alternates. We touched on this briefly, but an alternate may assume all of the powers and responsibilities of an absent committee member and their alternate for the duration of that meeting. Now, the exception to this is that the Chancellor's powers and responsibilities may only be assumed by the Chancellor's designees, while the employee member's powers and responsibilities may only be assumed by his or her alternate. As we know now, the term of office is 2 years for each audit committee member. And although there were recent elections into the audit committee because a few members resigned from the board, the current term of this committee will end in December of this year. The term of the audit committee chair is for 1 year, and a chair is usually elected at the start of every audit committee meeting, as we just did. So usually audit committees are responsible for both the internal and external audit functions of organizations. But in the case of BERS, the BERS Audit Committee is primarily responsible for overseeing the internal audit function. As for the external auditors, they are usually selected by the New York City Audit Committee, which is responsible for reviewing their work and reviewing the audited financial statements. Nevertheless, the results of the external audits are usually presented to the Board of Trustees of all 5 pension systems at the end of every fiscal year audit. This was done for our board at the last board meeting in December, and the presentation to the New York City Audit Committee will happen in about 2 weeks, as Sandy mentioned. And our external auditors for the last 2 years have been Grant Thornton. Now, with respect to the audit committee's responsibilities, in assisting the Board of Trustees with its oversight over financial reporting, risk management, internal controls, and compliance, the audit committee relies heavily on internal audit to provide an objective view on the adequacy and effectiveness of internal controls over key processes. The audit committee does this by reviewing the risk assessment results, reviewing and approving the internal audit plan, any audit reports from internal audit staffing level and resources, and also by communicating any concerns or matters of interest to internal audit and to the executive office and senior management. Meetings are usually held quarterly, although the committee reserves the right to call any additional meetings as needed. Now, when it comes to the independence of the internal audit function, this is primarily achieved via the reporting structure of internal audit. And that's the reason why internal audit reports functionally to the audit committee and administratively to the executive office. Now, speaking on core attributes of audit committees, the number one thing would be possessing a working knowledge of audit, finance, IT, law, governance, risk, and internal control. Now, worthy of note here is that no one member of the executive committee is expected to be an expert in all of these areas, but as a collective, the audit committee is expected to have working knowledge of these areas when taken as a whole. And then the other key attribute I wanted to point out is independence. It is very important that members of the audit committee are not in a position or do not appear to be in a position where their independence can be called to question. So an example of such an instance would be serving in some sort of consulting or advisory or paid capacity other than being a trustee. As far as responsibilities of the audit committee wants to ensure that there are appropriate anti-fraud controls and programs in place, that appropriate action is taken against perpetrators of fraud, and that the organization maintains high ethical standards for all managers and staff. The audit committee also wants to ensure that the system of risk management and internal controls is adequate and effective, and that key policies and procedures are in place and properly documented. Also, the audit committee wants to ensure that management is effectively monitoring compliance with applicable laws and regulations. And then when it comes to governance, the audit committee also wants to ensure that there is a review of the administrative processes by which the organization is governed, and also that tone at the top is in alignment with BERS's mission and goals. As for best practices, I believe we already touched on most of those. So calling executive sessions where necessary, overseeing the system of internal controls, reviewing and responding to any complaints or whistleblower information, and things of that nature. I wanted to pause here and see if there are any questions before I move on to the next slide. All right, so at the last audit committee meeting, one of the findings we presented was relating to outstanding checks. And at that time, the audit committee had mentioned that they wanted more information on this issue, sort of like a year-over-year analysis and more insight into what kinds of payments were included, whether the recipients were deceased and things like that. So I did put together this little chart here that I hope will provide that insight that the audit committee is seeking. But before I get right into the chart, I just wanted to note that there were some limitations in running this analysis. So the report of outstanding checks usually comes from the bank and is inherently limited in the level of detail that it contains. I was not able to determine based on what was contained in the report what exactly the payments were for. However, there was enough information to determine if these checks were periodics, what BERS calls periodics, and non-periodics. So periodics are checks that are run on a monthly schedule and will usually be pension payments to the retirees and also annuity payments to beneficiaries. Those are the periodics. And then for the non-periodics, those would be ad hoc requests from members for TDA refunds, pension refunds, loans, and things of that nature. So going into the chart, you will see here that it covers the period from 2012 to 2022, so the last 10 years. In 2012, there is a total of $190,000 in outstanding checks for 235 transactions. And of those transactions, 32 were for participants who are deceased. These amounts tend to go down in 2013 and then start to pick back up around 2015. And then the amount spikes in 2019 all the way to 2022. The majority of those checks that are included from 2019 onwards were for very small amounts, hence the high number. Like in 2019, we have 762 checks, 607 checks in 2020, and on and on. A lot of those checks were even for pennies sometimes, and I believe the reason for that was a part of the configuration of CPMS that resulted in BERS having to cut those small checks for members, and the majority of them are still outstanding. To put things in perspective, during a similar period, because my analysis was based on calendar year, but in fiscal year 2012 all the way to fiscal year 2022, the total benefit payments was $2.8 billion, and the total outstanding checks as of June 2022 was 3.31 million, and there were a total of 4,024 checks outstanding. Now, of the outstanding amount, 349,000 was made out to deceased participants. There were 538 checks, and those checks were for 333 unique members or retirees. For those who were deceased, some were deceased as far back as 1991, and the most recent were in 2022. So it's a wide range of dates of deaths involved here. Since the last audit, I've been in constant contact with fiscal ops, and they were able to reach out to the controller's office to have some very large outstanding checks canceled. So by nature of how the controller's office runs the checks, they would usually have large payments to cover EFTs that they would subsequently cancel after the EFTs are dispersed. So fiscal ops reached out to them and they canceled 2.85 million of those kinds of transactions. And then as far as the reason for outstanding checks, the main one is incorrect address. You know, as with every organization, I'm sure it's hard to keep up with the change in address of the members. So a lot of checks end up coming back to BERS. And then in some cases, as you see, the members were deceased. As far as remediating this issue, Fiscal Ops is still in talks with the Operations Department on how to address the issue. One of the recommendations was to set up an unclaimed funds database on our website. Another one was to have an alert system where if checks are not cashed after 90 days, the members are contacted to see if they still have the check or if there's any problem going on. As far as remediation, I do not at this time have a target completion date or plan of action because Fiscal Ops and Operations are still in discussions on how to resolve the issue. If there are any questions on this slide, I'll be happy to take them before moving on.
Day, I'm just curious, is there any way to do EFT transfers to members, or is that not something that's ever been contemplated before?
It's definitely something that BERS does. BERS does EFT transactions.
Okay. Is there like any sort of impetus or process in trying to encourage members to move towards EFTs rather than paper checks?
Yes, and in fact, I spoke with the deputy director of, I believe, transactions in operations today, and he did let me know that they are working towards moving for EFTs for refunds that are system generated, because a lot of times when members are not expecting a check, they're not looking out for one. So for those transactions that are generated by the system, say they've overpaid on their TDA goal amount or whatever it is, they're moving towards sending those out via EFT, after verifying that those accounts are active based on the member's current activity with the city.
Do you have a sense for like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of 761 checks. I guess like how many, what percentage of total transactions, I mean, you don't have to have this answer on hand, of like irregular, so to speak, irregular transactions are being completed through EFT versus versus like a paper check. And I ask all this because I know that at the DOE we've had a lot of efforts sort of through the pandemic to move away from paper checks entirely, 100%.
Yeah, I fortunately I don't have those numbers at hand.
It's okay. Just curious if you did. That's fine. We can move on.
Okay. All right, so this slide is going to cover very quickly the audits that are currently ongoing. The first one is an audit of logical and physical access security of our information systems and of the physical space at BERS. This is one audit I was hoping to report on today, but unfortunately, I guess with the holidays and everything, we're still trying to tie up the report and collect the responses to the findings. We are also working on a review of the variable program takedown. That's in field work. We just kicked off an audit of tax deferred annuity refunds in December, and we also kicked off an audit of travel and conference expenses in December as well. And then a couple of days ago, I believe 2 days ago, the Controller's Office announced the new audit, which is, Sandy touched on this earlier, but it's an audit of BERS's financial and operating practices as well as its board governance. Based on the engagement letter, they will be pretty much reviewing the entire organization, our governance practices, operating practices and financial practices, as well as our IT systems and the integrity of the data. The kickoff meeting for that audit is scheduled next week. Are there any comments or questions on this? All right, so next here is a follow-up report on prior audit recommendations. The first chart here shows findings that have been remediated since the last audit committee meeting, which was held in October. Since then, 9 findings were fully remediated. Those 9 findings included 3 high risk and 3 moderate risk findings, and 36 findings are either in progress, not started, and the breakdown of that will follow on the next slide. Chart number 2 shows the remediation status from an overall standpoint. And for the high risk findings, 40% of all of them are fully remediated, while 60% are still open. And as for the medium risk findings, 56% are fully remediated, while 44% are open. Just a quick highlight of some of the high risk findings that were recently remediated. I don't know if the committee recalls, but we did have a finding a couple of years ago that had to do with the approval of timekeeping records. And HR embarked on a project to remedy those, and they ended up approving just over 8,000 records. And so that project is complete, and they are now doing a bi-weekly review and monitoring of timekeeping records. The call center also completed some updates to some of its key documents, like its SOPM, its manual, and its policy and procedures. This is part of their remediation efforts to kind of beef up the knowledge base of the call center and, have more tools at their disposal to take on those calls. Unfortunately, I was going to report that they're fully staffed now and they have all 12 staff, but one of the employees that was supposed to onboard in December decided not to, rescinded the offer on the first day they were supposed to start. So they're back to having one open headcount with the call center. The call center also completed its customer service training program, and they have implemented an internal 20-week institutional knowledge training program as part of remediation efforts as well. When it comes to bounce checks, which was a finding from one of the audits at the last meeting, Fiscal Ops has worked with I think it was membership services and the records management team to ensure that members are now notified when a check that they sent to us bounces, and that the participant accounts are also notated that there's a bounce check. They're also now issuing payment receipts, so when a check comes to us on site, BERS is now able to issue a receipt to the recipient. And then lastly, a patch management tool has now been procured and implemented, and according to IT, they are conducting weekly vulnerability scannings. Just some tidbits of information. Looking back at 2022 as a whole, BERS was able to remediate 32 findings in calendar year 2022, or 47% of the findings that were outstanding at the top of the year. And this is compared to 2021, where only 19% of the findings for that year were remediated. So that's a big step and a big improvement in remediation efforts. Are there any questions on this slide before I move on? All right, so this chart here, chart number 3, shows the distribution of the 36 open findings from the prior slide. Those 36 findings include 17 high risk and 19 moderate risk, and the chart shows you the distribution of those risks from a department perspective. So 20% of the outstanding findings are within fiscal ops. 14% of those are high risk rated, while the other 6% are medium. 27% of open findings are within HR, 8% of which are high and 19% are medium. And then the other 4 areas depicted here are IT, member communications, operations, and velocity. And together they share the remaining 43% of open findings between them, as shown on the chart. Just a highlight on some of the high-risk findings that are still open. Procurement is one of them. At the last audit, we did report on the fact that the procurement framework was not yet fully set up and that there was more standardization and streamlining that needed to happen with the procurement processes at BERS. So the person who is responsible for carrying out those activities is actually leaving BERS, and today is their last day. So I believe that's going to have an impact on any work on the findings that have to do with procurement. So we just have to keep that one in mind. The remediation of outstanding checks is still outstanding, if you will. Operations and fiscal ops still need to work out how they're going to handle that. As for the high rate of lost calls, there's a multiple prong approach to attack that issue, and one of the remaining items is drafting the knowledge document for the call center, and they're currently working on that. Review and approval of unpaid overtime records is still in progress, and on and on. I don't think I need to run through every single one, but if there are any questions on any of these, I'll be happy to take them. All right.
Hi, Dave. It's Alan. How are you?
Hi.
Hi. I just had a quick question about the last slide in regards to your bounce checks. I know I mentioned it in the last meeting in regards to how much are we spending? Well, first of all, are we getting penalized every time a check bounces? Just like how a personal account we get charged.
I do not know the answer to that question, but I can have that answered before the call is over.
Sure, sure. I mean, at the end of the day, I was just curious to see how many bounce checks are there overall, all in all, and what is that amount? Because that amount, I call it wasted, could really be used to do something more productive or more better, and just pass that cost to the people that gave us the issue the checks that bounced it. So that's why I'm asking.
Okay, no problem. So Karen, if you don't mind, if you could reach out to Chitra and she can hop on and help us with that question. So Alan, if you don't mind us moving along while Karen gets the fiscal ops director on to okay.
Absolutely, not at all. Not at all. Thank you.
Okay. All right, so the last chart shows the overall remediation progress of high and medium risk rated findings across the departments at BERS. So for high risk findings, 47% are in progress, and remediation is yet to start on 10%, while 43% are fully remediated. And for the medium risk rated findings, 35% are in progress, 9% is yet to start, and 56% is fully remediated. Just to highlight some of the remediation actions that are in progress. So for procurement, as I mentioned on the last slide, they had a target date of June 2023. Depending on when they are able to fill that position, there may be, I do expect to see some delay in implementing recommendations over there. Overtime policy is being drafted. I do not at this time have a target completion date for that. In terms of key financial reports being rolled out in CPMS, the execution date is still planned for June 2023. I know that Fiscal Ops has been in serious talks with Velocity to do some testing on those reports and get them rolled out. As far as retirement reserves, this was a finding from the first audit that we actually did as an internal audit function, and it is very close to being resolved at the end of March. The last thing was to implement the fixes to the reserves in the system, and that is now with the Velocity team, and they expect to be done with that in the March upgrade or rollout. Cleanup of cash account and defaulted loans is ongoing. Employee feedback cycle is scheduled for January for the managers, and also training is scheduled for March for the managers. And then lastly, IT is still exploring some cloud backup options for the system. So looks like we have Shitra on. If there are no questions here, we can go back to the question of the bounce checks.
Good afternoon.
Hi, Shitra. Thanks for hopping on such short notice.
No problem.
So Alan had a question about the bounce checks. He wanted to know if we had an idea of how many bounce checks there are and if there's a charge to BERS when these checks bounce.
On an average, I would say for a fiscal year, we would have not more than 10 bounce check. That's the max. Probably it'll hover around 5 or 6 checks, max 10 checks. The charge would be, the bank charges $3, I believe. I'll confirm the rate. It's very minimal. I reached out to other pension systems. We used to charge $9, but I had reached out to other pension systems and their chief accountants about their practice on charging the members for the fees. And currently they don't charge the fees to the members. So we have not charged for the last 2 bounce checks. We have stopped charging the members $3, but not many bounce checks. That's where we stand.
That's perfect. Thank you. That's all I really need to know, because that's very minimal, not even 1% the way I look at it, right?
Right.
I mean, at the end of the day, as it becomes a substantial amount of overhead, that money probably could be used to be recouped and used for something more productive. That's what I was heading at. So thank you very much, Citra.
No problem. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think with the bounce checks, is more of an administrative headache for BERS to process than it is a financial burden.
Good point. Thank you.
All right, so risk assessment and internal audit plan. So every year we conduct a risk assessment with the goal of identifying new and emerging risks that are facing BERS, and also to prioritize those risks, prioritize known existing risks that could impact the achievement of BERS's goals and objectives. As with every risk assessment, we cover a wide range of risk factors that include operational risk, financial risk, fraud risk, reputational risk, human resources, volume of transactions, complexity of transactions, and also emerging risks that may not be fully known to the organization. So we usually start the process in the fall of every year, and we'll report on the results of the risk assessment. So I'm going to go over this very quickly today. In terms of the approach to the risk assessment, it's usually a 4-phased approach that I take, and it starts with the planning, information gathering, risk analysis, and reporting on the results. So the high risk categories that you see here in this little chart that I put together, it didn't change much from what we had last year. However, there were some updates to key considerations within each category. So for cybersecurity, some of the areas that I would want the audit committee and management to have top of mind will be data security and fraud prevention, and particularly as it relates to the MSS portal, especially since we've had some malicious activity in that area. We will want to ensure that we are keeping a very good eye on that aspect of our cybersecurity. Logical and physical access security also as it relates to access from within BERS and also access from the member portal is also a key consideration. Privileged user account management, so accounts, administrator accounts, accounts of high-level officers of BERS should also be top of mind when it comes to security. And cybersecurity awareness and training is a very important tool. We currently have training from KnowBe4 that's working in conjunction with IT, but that's a very a very valuable tool in training everyone across the board in the agency on staying on alert when it comes to identifying fraudulent transactions. As far as talent management is still an ongoing issue. The issue of brain drain and the risk of institutional knowledge loss, with resignations, retirements, challenges in acquiring and retaining talent, the added challenge of civil service constraint, the employee experience of the BERS worker and how that impacts retention, organizational culture, employee development, providing timely feedback, and succession planning are also key considerations when it comes to talent management. And also flexibility, like in the new world after COVID, if you will, flexibility is one of the requirements for almost every employee. When it comes to governance and oversight, some of the key considerations here would be ensuring that BERS has an ethics program as well as a fraud prevention program, reflecting on board governance, turnover of the board, adding new members, losing members, trustee education. Also, when it comes to pension administration, is also an area that should be top of mind. Financial reporting to the board on an interim basis is also key. Headcount restrictions that the board has the authority over, I guess, will also be a key consideration. And also, when it comes to governance, we want to ensure that there is effective organization-wide communication across the board, and also that the leadership team is being properly supported and developed. For system and data integrity, some of the key areas here to consider would be the accuracy and completeness of CPMS data. So our service information contained in CPMS, salary information, demographic information, issues with converted data are all things that should be top of mind. Payroll processing is also a very big one. There's a lot of payrolls that get processed through CPMS periodically, and the data comes from outside agencies, and a lot of times the data is not accurate, and so importing inaccurate data also impacts the integrity of our systems. Reporting from CPMS, there are severe limitations with CPMS reporting. One of them is with financial reporting, and as I showed in, I believe, the last slide prior to this, Fiscal Ops is working with the CPMS Velocity team to rectify those limitations and start getting reports out of CPMS. As for member experience, the member-facing teams are the member communications team, call center, MCU, and the front desk. The call center has had that challenge of having a high rate of dropped calls. They're working on that, but it should also be top of mind for management to see how they can continue to support the efforts of the call center, make sure that they're fully staffed and have the resources that they need to meet the demands of incoming calls and communications with members. There are data integrity issues that are also impacting the accuracy of information that these member-facing teams provide to members, so that should be top of mind as well. And also, timely and accurate processing of member requests will definitely impact member experience and should be top of mind. As for investments, key areas to keep in mind would be portfolio management and monitoring, the education of trustees as it relates to investments and related decision making. The variable fund program is also top of mind for the investment team, and oversight of that program is also top of mind. We are conducting an audit in that area and should be able to report on that at the next audit committee meeting. And then when it comes to disbursements and benefit payments, accuracy, timeliness, segregation of duties as it relates to benefits processing is key. So when it comes to refunds, pensions, dormant accounts, exporting payments, those are all high risk areas that should be top of mind. And then lastly, compliance. So there are many regulations that BERS has to comply to, and we want to make sure that BERS is aware of all those areas and has appropriate policies in place to ensure that the controls for those areas are present and adequate and functioning as intended. Are there any questions regarding the risk assessment?
Alan, is your hand up from before, or is it a new question?
Yes, sorry, that was from before.
Okay.
Okay, just checking.
So last thing here would be the internal audit plan. So after the risk assessment, the next logical step is to devise a plan to conduct audits that will be able to provide management with reasonable assurance on the functioning, the effectiveness of internal controls as it relates to the areas of high risk. So far at BERS, we are able to conduct audits around the high risk areas. It's my goal that as the internal audit department matures, we are able to also conduct audits for the moderate risk areas as well. And if we so choose, the low risk. But as it stands currently, the plan is centered around the high risk areas. You will see on the screen the audits that are planned for calendar year 2023, 2024, and 2025. If there are any questions around this, I'll be happy to answer them. But immediately after this will be a vote to approve the internal audit plan. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them. All right, so it appears that there are none. So that's all I have for the audit committee today. I do thank you for your time. And then Alex, if we can move on with the next agenda item, item
Absolutely.
6.
Thank you, Ade. The next item on the agenda is agenda item 6, approval of the internal audit plan. Can I get a motion to consider, please?
So moved, Russ.
Thank you, Russ. Can I have a second?
Marjorie, second.
Thank you, Marjorie. Sorry, I had the landline ring at the worst possible time. The 3-year rolling internal audit plan presented to us just now by the internal audit director contains planned assurance and consulting engagements for calendar years 2023, 24, and 25. Any material changes to the planned activities and or resources for the department may result in revisions to the plan. Significant changes will be communicated to the audit committee and senior management by the internal audit director. Are there any questions? Hearing no questions, I think we can submit this for a vote. Please raise your hand if you vote to approve the internal audit plan.
Aye, Russ.
Hi, Greg.
Aye, Nick.
Hi, Alan.
Hi, Marjorie.
Hi, Allison.
Please raise your hand if you do not approve the internal audit plan. Are there any abstentions? This motion passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is agenda item 7, committee discussion. This is just an opportunity for members of the committee to discuss any items that were discussed here today if they feel that anything needs to be discussed further. Can we have a motion to consider?
So moved.
Thank you, Russ. A second?
Second, Greg.
Thank you, Greg. Are there any issues discussed here today that need to be discussed further? Does anyone have any additional questions for Ade or any other staff? Okay, hearing none. That concludes the agenda for this meeting. The next meeting of the Audit Committee of the BERS Board of Trustees will be scheduled for the second quarter of 2023 and communicated to all committee members and invitees. Can I please have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Russ.
Thank you, Russ. A second?
Marjorie?
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, Russ.
Aye.
Aye.
Marjorie?
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. This committee meeting is adjourned. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.